In the autumn of 1883, along the broad, mud-brown reach of the Willamette River in western Oregon, a paddle-wheel ferry called the Cecilia Drummond lay in 12 feet of water at the shallows near the Corman Landing. She had sunk in the spring flood of 1871, 12 years before, and in those 12 years, no one had gone down into her. They said the river current had weakened her hull, and that she could shift at any time. They said the cargo hold flooded black as tar, and that a diver who did not know the interior could lose his way in a minute. They said the company that had owned her, the Western Valley Transit Corporation of Portland, had stripped anything of value before the water came in. The men who repeated these things in the Corman Hotel and on the dock did so with the comfortable authority of people who have never tested the claims they make, and they had been repeating them long enough that the claims had hardened into fact. Nora Voss was 27 years old when she arrived at Corman Landing in the third week of October 1883, carrying a canvas satchel and a waterproof case that held her father's tools. She had $41 in her coat pocket, and she had spent 4 of those dollars on the stage line from Portland. She had dark brown hair, worn in a braid pinned at the nape, and she moved through the world with the particular, unhurried precision of someone who has learned that rushing rarely saves time and usually costs it. Her boots were worn at the outer heel, and her coat had been restitched at both shoulders, and she carried the waterproof tool case on a shoulder strap with the ease of long habit, so that it sat against her hip and did not swing. She had not announced herself to anyone in Corman. She had studied the landing and the river from the road above the bank before she descended, taking the time to understand the shape of the site from a distance, noting the location of the paddle wheel housing that broke the surface at low water and the angle at which it sat relative to the dock. She understood, before she spoke to a single person in the town, which way the vessel had settled and roughly where its bow now pointed. Her father, Callum Vass, had been a salvage diver and a ship's rigger for 30 years along the Oregon coast. He had drowned himself in the winter of 1882, not through negligence but through bad fortune and a frayed cable, and what he had left her was a debt on their equipment, a set of copper-fitted diving tools, and an education that had taken 27 years to complete. Nora had watched her father work a sunken vessel for the first time when she was 9 years old. He had brought her to the river's edge and explained everything before he went under. He explained the way the current runs faster near the hull, the way silt clouds at the touch of a hand and blinds you if you stir it, the way you follow the lines of the vessel rather than your own instincts when the dark is total. She had helped him surface the brass fittings and the sealed strongboxes from a grain barge that had gone down in 1862. She had learned to read the water, to read the silhouette of a sunken form from the bank, to understand what a vessel looked like from below and what it was likely to hold where. By the time she was 16, she could calculate a dive plan from a vessel's profile and a depth reading. By the time she was 20, she could read a hull's list and angle from surface observation alone. Her father had other helpers on the larger jobs, men hired by the day, and he kept them well away from her while she worked, not because he was ashamed of what she could do, because he did not want her distracted by people who did not understand what they were watching. When her father died and the debts came due, she had sold the diving bell and the heavy apparatus and kept only the hand tools and the chest plates and the copper lines. She had worked 3 salvage contracts in a year and paid down most of what was owed. The Cecilia Drummond was not one of those contracts. The Cecilia Drummond was something she had found herself. She had been in Portland 2 months earlier to file paperwork on a smaller job, and she had stopped into the Multnomah County Registrar's office to pay a recording fee. While she waited, she had read the notices pinned to the board by the window as she habitually read whatever was in reach while she waited for anything, a practice her father had called the cheapest form of education a person could purchase. One of the notices was a lien filing, 12 years old and faded to near illegibility, from a family called Marchetti. They had operated a dry goods concern out of Corman and had shipped a cargo of goods aboard the Cecilia Drummond in April of 1871, 2 weeks before she sank. The manifest listed the cargo's declared value at $380. The lien named the Western Valley Transit Corporation as the responsible party. It had never been resolved. The notice had sat on that board, pinned and unread, for 12 years. Nora had copied the lien notice in her own hand before she left the building. She spent 1 week in Portland reading every document she could locate about the Cecilia Drummond, the insurance filing, the company's original cargo manifest, the shipping ledger that had been entered into evidence when a freight company sued the Transit Corporation in 1872 and then settled out of court. She found the name of the ferry's captain, a man named Horace Delaney, who had retired to the Willamette Valley after the sinking. She found, in a footnote to the insurance filing, a single line that said the cargo hold had been sealed by the company's agent before the ferry was abandoned to the river. Not emptied, sealed. She had the tools her father had taught her to use. She had read enough about what might still be in that hold to understand the difference between the two words. If you have ever seen a thing that everyone else had stopped looking at, you understand what happened next. Before you read another word, consider telling us in the comments what you would have done with a 12-year-old lien notice on a sunken ship. We will be right here. The landing at Corman was a cluster of weathered buildings on the east bank of the river. A general store, a cooperative, a small hotel that also served as the post office, and a dock that had been extended twice since the ferry's day, and now stretched 30 feet past where the Cecilia Drummond's paddle wheel housing broke the surface at low water. The wheel housing was visible as a curve of rotted wood and corroded iron, the paddles long since taken by the current, sitting in the river like the half-buried rib of something enormous. Locals called it the drum and used it to gauge the water level in flood season. They had stopped thinking of it as a ship years before Nora arrived. The dockmaster was a man named Elias Pried, 60-ish, with a weathered face and a manner of speaking that suggested he had answered questions he found foolish many times before, and did not intend to enjoy it this time either. He heard Nora out without expression, and then told her that the company had declared the Cecilia Drummond an abandoned vessel in 1872, that she now sat on county river bottom, and that if she had a salvage license she could legally work the site. She had a salvage license. She had obtained it in Portland before she left. Pruitt looked at the license and then looked at her and said, very quietly, that the hull was not sound, and that 2 men from a salvage outfit had gone down in 1878 and come back up the same day and left without explanation. Nora said she understood. Pruitt said that the current near the hull ran fast when the river was high, and that October was a wet month. Nora said she would work in the mornings when the level was lower. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment and then at the waterproof tool case she had set down on the dock. He said one more thing, that the men who went down in 1878 had seen something that put them off the job, and he did not know what it was because they had not said. He offered this information without commentary, in the way a man offers something he considers you should have, even if he does not think it will change your mind. She thanked him for it. She did not ask what he thought it was. If the men from 1878 had gone down without mapping the hull first, and they almost certainly had, they had likely been disoriented by the silt and the dark and the unexpected list of the vessel, and had come up with the story of something that frightened them, because it was easier than admitting they had panicked in the dark. It was a common enough account among divers who went into vessels without preparation. Pruitt gave her the use of a flat-bottomed workboat tied at the dock's near end, and he charged her 30 cents a day for it. And he did not offer further help or ask if she needed it. She did not need it. Not yet. The first 3 mornings she did not go into the water at all. She worked from the boat, anchored over the sight, dropping a weighted line to map the hull's silhouette in the silt. The paddle wheel housing told her where the stern was. The angle of the wheel housing against the current told her where the bow had settled and how the vessel had come to rest. The Cecilia Drummond had sunk on her port side, listing perhaps 15 degrees from true vertical, and she had settled into the silt with the bow pointing slightly upstream. This mattered. It meant the cargo hold, which on a side-wheel ferry of this class sat in the bow section just forward of the boiler deck, was now at an angle that would keep water in it, even at low tide. It also meant the hatch would open upward and inward, not against the current. On the second morning, she made a sketch of the hull's probable interior layout from memory, working from the type specifications she had read for this class of vessel, and from what she could measure by the weighted line and the angle of the visible housing. She marked the probable location of the cargo hatch in the sketch and noted 2 approaches, one from the bow, which would require navigating past the collapsed forward deck structure, and one along the port side, which was the lower side but gave a cleaner line to the hold. She circled the port approach and set the sketch aside. On the 3rd morning, she assembled the dive equipment in the boat and went through each piece, as her father had required her to do before every dive. She checked the seams of the chest plate, the condition of the copper fittings, the oil charge in the lantern, the tension of the rope guides. Her father had said that a diver who rushes the equipment check is a diver who has already made a decision she has not admitted to herself. She did not rush it. The equipment took 40 minutes to check, and when she was done, she was satisfied with all of it. Her father had taught her that you never descend into a vessel without first knowing its geometry. He had said it the first time when she was 11 years old, standing beside him on a Portland dock while he studied the profile of a capsized barge through a water glass. He had held the glass over the side and shown her how to read the lines of a hull in the green-brown murk. You learn the ship first, he had said, and then the ship tells you how to move through it. You do not improvise in the dark. She did not improvise in the dark. On the 4th morning, she suited up, working alone at the stern of the flat-bottomed boat with the systematic care those years had drilled into her. She carried the copper-bodied dive lantern her father had assembled himself, burning refined oil in a sealed chamber that would stay lit for 30 minutes at depth. She carried a thin steel pry bar, a roll of marking twine to run a line from the anchor chain to the hatch so she could find her way back, and a small canvas bag for anything she needed to bring to the surface for a closer look. The water in the Willamette in late October is cold enough to make the chest tight on entry. She had worked in colder. She went in along the anchor chain, feeling the current push at her from the east, and she followed the chain down until the silt rose up around her and the light at the surface became a pale smear above. She had 14 feet of depth at low water. She had practiced the dive's path in her mind for 3 mornings, and she followed it now with the calm of someone who has rehearsed a thing until it is no longer frightening, but merely difficult. The hull appeared out of the dark, the way all sunken things do, a shadow that resolves slowly into a shape, and then a color, and then a texture. The Cecilia Drummond was covered in 12 years of river growth, mussels and silt, and the pale roots of water plants draped over her gunnels like a veil. Her hull planks had swollen and split in the lower run, where the silt pressed hardest, but above the waterline she was more intact than Nora had expected. The transit company's agent had used good timber when he built her, and the cold river had preserved what time and pressure had not yet broken. She followed the hull forward, running her hand along the planking to stay oriented, paying out the marking twine from her belt. She found the cargo hatch cover on the third dive, after 2 ascents to breathe at the surface and consult the mental map she had built. The hatch was iron-edged and iron-latched, the wood of the cover long since swollen tight in its frame. The latch was not locked. There was no lock. The wood had fused to the iron edge in 12 years of river pressure, and it would not move by hand. She surfaced, changed to the pry bar, and went back down. It took her most of that morning working in 30-minute intervals with the lantern to break the suction. The wood around the iron edge had to be worked in sections, the pry bar placed flat against the frame, and the leverage applied slowly, so as not to crack the hatch cover entirely and let the silt of the hold's interior billow out and blind her. She worked the north edge first, then the south edge, then rested the bar and tried the iron latch directly. It moved. Not far, but it moved. She went up for air. She returned and placed the bar under the hatch's iron rim on the east side, closest to the hull's midline, where the current's pressure would help rather than fight her. She leaned into it with the full weight of her body, braced against the hull planking with both boots. The hatch gave. It swung open and inward as she had predicted, and the cold dark of the hold met the cold dark of the river. And for a moment the silt she had disturbed made a curtain she could not see past. She held her position, one hand on the hatch rim, and waited. The current moved the silt curtain east and thinned it, and the lantern found the interior of the Cecilia Drummond's cargo hold. There are moments in a diver's work that have no preparation for them, not the discovery itself, but the quality of stillness that precedes it, the instant in which you understand that what you are looking at has not been looked at by anyone for 12 years, and that the thing sealed inside has been waiting in the dark for exactly as long, unchanged. The hold smelled of deep water and iron and the particular mineral cold of a space that has been sealed against the living world. The goods that had been loaded aboard the ferry in April of 1871 were gone, long since dissolved or scattered by the initial flooding. They had been cloth goods and dry goods, the perishable kind, and the river had taken them. What the river had not taken were the crates. There were 4 of them, stacked in the forward corner of the hold against the starboard bulkhead, which the ship's list had brought closest to the silt floor. They were wooden shipping crates bound in iron strap, and they were stamped with a mark she could read even in the lantern light, a diamond shape with the letters WVTC inside it, Western Valley Transit Corporation. These were not passenger goods. These were company property, loaded separately from the declared cargo and placed in the hold before the ferry sailed. She needed air. She went up. She sat in the boat and thought about it for 20 minutes, the lantern drying in the October air beside her. A pair of mergansers worked the surface 30 feet south of the boat, diving and surfacing with the indifference of creatures to whom the river is simply home. Nora watched them and thought through what she had seen. The company had sealed the hold. The company had told the insurance adjuster that the hold contained only the declared passenger cargo that had been lost in the flooding. The company had settled every claim against them, including the Marchetti family's lien, with a single payment that the records showed had been a fraction of the declared value. The cargo hold of a vessel the company had declared a total loss now held 4 iron-strap company crates that no adjuster had ever seen. She tied a fresh section of twine to her belt and went back down. It took her 3 more days to surface the crates, working one at a time, running the boat's anchor line through the iron strap, and using the leverage of the boat itself to lift each crate from the hold's floor and float it to the surface. The work was the kind that shows nothing on the outside and costs everything inside. Cold hands, cold lungs, the ache of leaning into ropes and chains in a current that did not care whether she finished. She did not think of it as hardship. She thought of it as the price the job asked, and she paid it without argument, the way her father had always paid it, and the way his father before him had paid it, on docks and riverbanks, and at the railings of salvage boats from Portland to the Columbia Bar. 2 of the crates fell apart when they met the air. The wood had rotted through in the lower sections despite the iron banding, and the contents dissolved into river muck and were unreadable. She set these aside on the dock, recording what she could of the stamps and markings, which was little. The 3rd crate held papers. They were wrapped in oilskin and bound with twine, and the oilskin had kept the worst of the river out. And when she peeled the wrapping back in the workboat, she found a stack of documents still legible at their centers, where the water had not fully penetrated. She worked through them slowly, drying each page against the boat's flat stern, reading in the thin autumn light. She did not rush. Her father had taught her that a thing found after 12 years will wait another hour. The documents were cargo manifests, not the public manifests filed with the county, but the company's internal manifests, the ones kept in the company's own accounting system and never submitted to any regulatory body. They covered a period from 1868 to 1871, the last 3 years of the Cecilia Drummond's operation. They showed that the transit company had been collecting and charging freight fees for goods that were never delivered, a systematic false billing scheme by which shippers were charged for cargo transport, the cargo accepted at the dock, and the goods then diverted at the company's Portland warehouse and resold at the company agent's discretion. The entries were meticulous, each shipper named and dated, each cargo itemized, each diverted consignment given a separate notation in a hand she recognized from the signature at the bottom of the pages as a deliberate effort to make the parallel record look as though a different clerk had kept it. It was not convincing if you read it carefully. No one had read it carefully, because no one had known it existed, because it had been sealed in the hold of a sunken ferry for 12 years and declared worthless. The manifests named the shippers. They named the amounts. They named the agent, a man called Aldous Crane, who had served as the company's Western Oregon operations manager from 1866 until the company's dissolution in 1874. The Marchetti family's name appeared 17 times across 4 years of manifests. The 4th crate was still intact. It was heavier than the others, and when she worked the iron strap loose and pulled the top off, she found it held the company's duplicate ledger for the years 1869 and 1870, a bound accounting book wrapped in the same oilskin, partially damaged by water at the edges but legible across most of its pages. The ledger showed the double accounting. The public revenue entered in one column. The diverted goods revenue entered in a second column under a different company name, the Inland Freight Clearinghouse, which appeared nowhere in the company's public filings. Crane's initials appeared at the bottom of each entry in the second column. The ledger was, in the most immediate and physical sense possible, the proof that would have undone the Western Valley Transit Corporation if the ferry had not sunk before anyone found the hold. Except the ferry had sunk, and these documents had been in the hold when she went down, which meant someone had put them there deliberately. The company's agent had loaded the hold. The company's agent had sealed the hold. The company had then declared the vessel a total loss and paid the claims at a fraction of their true value. What had seemed like fraud against the shippers was also a burial. The evidence sealed under 12 feet of river water, where no one had cause to look for it, and where, if you declared the vessel stripped and worthless, it would presumably stay forever. It had stayed for 12 years, sealed and still, in the cold dark of the hold. It had waited for someone who did not believe the things people said about things they had not looked at. Nora sat with the ledger and the manifests for a long time in the flat-bottomed boat, the pages spread and drying on the stern planks, the fourth crate resting on the bow thwart. The river moved east. An October wind came in off the valley and riffled the pages at their edges, and she weighted them with the pry bar and the lantern and the coil of marking twine to keep them flat. A great blue heron stood on the far bank and watched her from 30 yards, motionless in the gray light, with the patience of something that has stood in one place since before there were names for rivers. She knew what she had. She also knew that the ledger and the manifests named parties who had been wronged, and that naming a wrong and righting it were different kinds of work, requiring different tools and different patience, and that she was equipped for both. If you have watched a woman sit quietly in a boat on a cold river and understood that she is deciding something, you understand what the next 4 days looked like from the dock. She wrote letters first, one to the Multnomah County Registrar's office, notifying them of a salvage recovery and attaching her license number, one to the office of the county sheriff in Corman, describing the documents and requesting that they be received into evidence under official care, one to the Marchetti family. She had found an address for them in the Corman Hotel Register. A daughter of the original family, a woman named Rosa Marchetti, had married and moved to Salem, and the hotel's proprietor knew the name and found the address without being asked. She wrote the letters in the hotel's small back room that evening, sitting at the table with the documents spread in front of her and a lamp close enough to see by. The proprietor, a lean woman named Greta Sands, who ran the hotel and the post office with the efficiency of someone who has long since stopped having patience for disorder, brought her a cup of coffee without being asked and set it at the table's corner and left without comment. Nora thanked her. Greta Sands said it was no trouble and went back to the front counter, and the two of them spent 2 hours in the comfortable silence of people who understand each other's work without needing to speak of it. Elias Pruitt helped her carry the fourth crate up from the dock to the hotel's dry back room the following morning, where she spread the ledger pages and the manifests on the table and let them finish drying in the warmth. He read nothing. He was not invited to. He helped because it was clear that help was useful and that nothing further was required of him, and this seemed to satisfy him entirely. He set the crate down where she indicated and stood for a moment looking at the spread documents with the expression of a man who recognizes that something significant is being handled and who is content to recognize it from a distance. The county sheriff arrived 2 days later. He was a man named Burl Cass, compact and deliberate, who examined the documents with the careful attention of someone who reads slowly and retains everything. He asked her 3 questions: where exactly she had found the crates, whether she had moved or altered the documents in any way beyond drying them, whether she had shown them to anyone other than the dockmaster and the hotel proprietor. She answered each question directly and without elaboration. She had found the crates in the forward port corner of the cargo hold. She had not altered the documents. She had shown them to no one. Cass nodded at each answer and wrote nothing down. He would remember it, she understood, as her father's generation had remembered things before. The habit of note-taking became common. He took the documents and the ledger into official custody and gave her a receipt on county paper, itemizing each document she surrendered. The receipt was precise and complete, written in a clear, plain hand. Then he asked whether she intended to file for salvage recompense against the estate of the Western Valley Transit Corporation. She said that she would file for what the law allowed. He nodded and said that Aldous Crane had died in 1879 and that the corporation had been dissolved in 1874 after the principals absconded following a separate fraud investigation that had, it turned out, been looking in entirely the wrong direction. There was no longer a company to prosecute, and no living principal to charge. What remained was the estate question, whether the defrauded parties could recover anything from the dissolution assets that had been placed in trust when the corporation wound up. The answer was yes, partially. The trust was small, but it existed. Cass said he would contact the county attorney and have the documents entered into the court record within the week. He said it without satisfaction and without drama, the way a man states an intention he knows he will carry out. He put the documents in the case he had brought and closed the latches and stood up from the table and shook her hand with a grip that acknowledged the work without overstating it. After he left, Nora sat for a while at the hotel table with the empty space where the documents had been. The lamp was still burning. Greta Sands had gone to the front for the evening mail, and the hotel was quiet except for the sound of the river, which was audible through the back wall of the building when the wind came off the east bank. There is a particular quality to a room after evidence has been taken up and carried to where it belongs. It is not quite satisfaction and not quite absence. It is the feeling of a held breath, released at last. The thing that needed to be done has been done, and the rest will take the time it takes, and there is nothing more for tonight. It took the better part of the following year for the legal work to move through the county court. The process was not dramatic. It involved letters and filings, and a day in front of a county judge who had read the documents twice and asked a series of precise questions that demonstrated he had understood them. It involved a Portland attorney who had represented another of the Cecilia Drummond's defrauded shippers and who agreed to represent the Marchetti claim once the manifests established its foundation. It involved, at the end, a settlement conference in a room in the Corman courthouse that smelled of wood oil and old paper, and the particular institutional sobriety of places where obligations are finally met. Rosa Marchetti came to Corman in the spring of 1884, a woman in her 40s with her mother's dry goods manner and a composure that had clearly been purchased at some cost over many years of waiting. She sat at the conference table with Nora Voss and the county attorney named Fletcher and the Portland attorney, and they went through the manifest together, page by page. Rosa identified her family's shipments from memory. She had been a girl of 12 when the goods were first diverted, 9 when it had begun, and her father had kept records in a leather-bound account book that she had inherited and maintained in a cedar chest for 15 years after his death. The account book's entries matched the manifests document for document. The trust settlement Rosa received was not the full value her family had been owed. The trust was what it was, and it bore only what it could bear. She received a third of the original claim's value, plus the interest the trust had accumulated in its 10 years of dormancy since the corporation's dissolution. She accepted it without argument and said only that she was glad the manifests had been kept. Nora said they had been very well wrapped. Rosa looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite sorrow, and not quite either, but something the two of them both recognized without needing to name it. The look of two women who have each spent a long time maintaining a record that other people had decided did not matter. Then Rosa picked up her copy of the settlement papers and folded them into her bag with the precise, unhurried care of someone who has learned to take good care of documents. There were 4 other claimants who filed in the months that followed, using the manifests Cass had entered into the county record, which became a public document once the court proceedings concluded. 3 of them received partial settlements from the trust. 1 received nothing, because the trust was by then exhausted. That claimant was a Coos Bay lumber concern whose principals had died years before, and the claim had no living party to receive it. The attorney entered it into the record anyway. It belonged there. Aldous Crane had sealed those documents in that hold, believing that the river would hold them forever. He had understood rivers as things that receive and conceal, that swallow what you give them and keep it down. He had not lived to learn what Nora's father had known from the first day he descended into dark water. A river is not a vault. It gives things back eventually to the right set of hands. The salvage recompense Nora filed for came through in the summer of 1884, $90, which was the standard rate for a single diver non-commercial recovery of historical materials. The standard rate was not generous. It was designed for divers who did not expect to be paid well for work that was not commercially profitable, and she did not argue with it. She used $60 of it to buy a new oilskin for the dive suit and to replace the pry bar she had bent on the hatch rim. She used the remaining $30 on a room in Portland for the winter and on the fee for the next salvage license renewal. She would need the license renewed because she had already identified the next site, a grain scow that had gone down in the Columbia in 1867, carrying what the manifest listed as standard farm goods, and whose insurance settlement had been contested by a family of Kalama Valley farmers for 6 years before the case was closed without resolution. She had found the filing in the same courthouse where the Cecilia Drummond's documents were now indexed and dry. Elias Pruitt asked her, the morning she loaded the flat-bottom boat back to its original tie and prepared to settle her bill, what exactly she had found down there that made it worth all that cold. She said she had found what was sealed inside. Pruitt chewed on this and then said that a lot of people had looked at that wheel housing sticking out of the water for 12 years and not thought there was anything in it worth the cold and the trouble. Nora said that most people had been looking at the wheel. He considered this for a moment with the expression of a man filing something away for later. And then he took the 30 cents for the last day's boat hire and said she was welcome back at the dock if she had further work in the area. He said it in the tone of a man who offers a professional courtesy, not a personal one, and this was exactly the tone in which she received it. She left Corman Landing on a gray November morning, the dive case on her back and the canvas satchel over one shoulder, walking the road toward the stage line stop. The Willamette ran broad and flat beside the road for half a mile before the trees closed in, and she walked that half mile with her coat collar up and her eyes on the water, the way her father had taught her to do, reading the surface for what it carried, reading the lines below for what the surface did not show. The Cecilia Drummond's paddle wheel housing still broke the surface at low water, the curve of corroded iron catching the November light, the same way it had caught it for 12 years before she arrived, and would go on catching it for years after she left. The hold was open now. The hatch swung back on its iron frame, and the river would take the rest of the vessel apart in its own time, season by season, the planks separating from their spikes and the iron fittings sinking into the silt until nothing remained that anyone passing in a boat would recognize as a ship. The documents she had surfaced from the cargo hold were in a file cabinet in the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland. They would remain there, indexed and dry, for as long as the county kept its records. Rosa Marchetti's settlement papers were in a bag in Salem. The pry bar Nora had replaced was wrapped in the new oilskin at the bottom of the waterproof case, beside the copper-bodied lantern and the roll of marking twine, and the tools her father had fitted and calibrated for 30 years of river work. The pry bar was of the same weight and length as the one she had bent, because she had learned long ago that a tool you know the feel of is worth more than a better one you do not. And she had spent an hour at the ironmonger's in Portland before she left to find one that sat right in her hand. Her father had told her, the last time they worked beside each other, standing on the bank of the Clatsop Slough in the last light of an October afternoon, very much like this one, that the river takes many things, but it does not destroy what is sealed inside the dark. It only holds it until someone with the right knowledge and the right tools comes to find it, and then it gives it up. He had said it while coiling the anchor line into its bucket, not looking at her in the offhand tone he used for the things he most wanted her to remember. She'd been 25 years old, and she had understood exactly what he meant, and she had said nothing, and neither had he. And they had driven the wagon back to Portland in the early dark, with the day's recovery secured in the bed behind them. She had never known him to be wrong about that. If this story settled something in you, leave a word about it below. And if you want to hear about the next woman who opened what no one else would touch, that story is waiting for you here.